Welcome to the Workplace Minute, powered by H3HR Advisors and sponsored by WorkHuman. Thanks for joining me for a quick update on what's important in the world of work. My name is Steve Boese. This week on the Workplace Minute, we are beginning a three-part series on the ethics of using artificial intelligence in the decisions that affect people's work and livelihoods. We'll take a look at AI in recruiting and selection, AI in performance and promotion decisions, and lastly, AI for workforce planning. Across all three episodes, we will return to one central principle. AI may assist in employment and workplace decisions, but it can't absorb the moral responsibilities for those decisions. Today, let's start with hiring. Artificial intelligence is already embedded throughout the recruiting and selection processes. Employers use it to write job descriptions, place jobs advertisements, search for potential candidates, screen resumes and applications, match people to openings, administer assessments, summarize interviews, and finally to recommend which candidates should advance. Some of these uses are relatively administrative. AI can help schedule interviews, answer routine candidate questions, or summarize application materials, but other uses are much more consequential. A system might decide which job seekers actually even see a job ad, which resumes are reviewed by a recruiter, which candidates meet an assessment threshold, or whose recorded interview appears to demonstrate the right characteristics for success on the job. And in many cases, candidates may have little idea how extensively AI is influencing the process. They may never know why they were rejected, what information was considered, or whether a human ever meaningfully reviewed their application at all. And this creates an important ethical distinction for HR leaders. Using AI to help manage a process is different from allowing AI to make or effectively determine an employment decision. The first question HR leaders need to ask is where AI actually enters into the hiring process. That sounds simple, it can be surprisingly difficult to answer. A recruiting platform may contain several different AI capabilities. A sourcing tool may decide who is invited to apply at all. A matching algorithm may rank candidates before a recruiter or a hiring committee even sees them. An assessment may generate a score or a recommendation which heavily influences who progresses and who is selected out. An interview tool may analyze a candidate's responses across multiple dimensions. And generative AI may summarize all of this information and give a recommendation about who should move forward in the process and who gets passed up. Looking only at the final hiring decision misses all the earlier points where someone could have been screened out. HR leaders need to maintain a complete picture of these processes. What data does each tool use? What is it attempting to predict? How was it validated? What characteristics influence its recommendations? Has it been tested for different demographic groups or for people with disabilities? Can the employer explain why the information being measured is related to successful performance in this particular job? It's not sufficient to ask whether a product uses AI responsibly. HR needs to understand whether the employer is using that product responsibly in its own context. A tool might have been validated for one kind of role and then applied to another. An algorithm might have been designed to recommend candidates and gradually became more of a de facto rejection tool. Recruiters may place more confidence in a ranking than the designers really intend. And a feature originally introduced to improve efficiency may quietly become one of the most powerful decision points in the process. This is also where the question of bias becomes more complicated. Organizations sometimes believe AI will make hiring more objective by removing human bias. AI may reduce some forms of individual subjectivity, although it can also reproduce patterns embedded in historical data and past organizational decisions. If a company trains a system using the characteristics of people it previously hired, promoted, or considered successful, the system may learn the organization's past preferences along with its past inequities. It may favor particular career paths, schools, employers, employment histories, communication styles, or patterns of availability. Even when protected characteristics are removed, other data can serve as proxies for them. A system doesn't need to intentionally discriminate to still create an unfair result. So that brings us to a question of legitimacy. When is it legitimate to use AI in hiring? Responsible use should satisfy several tests. The information being evaluated should be meaningfully related to the job. The system should be sufficiently valid and reliable for the purpose for which it was being used. Its outcomes should be tested for harmful bias and unequal impact. And candidates should receive appropriate transparency about how AI technology is being used. And people with disabilities should have access to accommodations or alternative processes. And there should always be a meaningful way for someone to question an error or request a human review. The level of scrutiny should increase along with the consequence of the decision. Using an AI to suggest interview times presents a very different level of risk from using AI to decide whether a candidate will even receive an interview. And human oversight matters as well. Although simply inserting a person somewhere in the workflow does not always resolve any ethical issues. A recruiter who automatically accepts an algorithm's ranking is just providing approval rather than adding human judgment. Meaningful human oversight requires someone who understands what the systems are doing, has access to relevant context, can question the recommendations, and possesses the authority to make a different decision or to override the tools. That person must also be held accountable for those outcomes. And we should also ask who carries the risk when these AI technologies fail. The employer and the technology provider receive the efficiency benefits when an automated system processes thousands of applications. The rejected candidate often carries nearly all the consequences of an error. That person may lose an opportunity without ever knowing that inaccurate data, an inappropriate assumption, or an unvalidated prediction impacted that decision. So this imbalance creates a higher level of obligation for the employer. Efficiency for the organization doesn't justify an opaque process for the candidate, especially when employment and economic opportunity are at stake. So having said all that, what should HR leaders be doing now? First, you need to understand your entire AI-enabled hiring process, and you need to identify every place where an algorithm influences who sees a job, who enters the candidate pool, who receives human consideration, and who advances. And you have to also think about capabilities embedded into existing recruiting platforms and also by tools purchased by individual teams. Second, you need to require evidence rather than assurance. You need to ask your vendors to explain what their systems measure, what data they use, how they validate their results, how they test for adverse outcomes, how frequently do the models change, and what documentation will you receive. Then you can conduct your own monitoring using your organization's jobs, candidates, and outcomes. Next, establish clear limits on automated decision-making. Determine which uses of AI are acceptable, which require meaningful human review, and which decisions should never be delegated to an algorithm. And you have to provide candidates with transparency, accommodations, and a practical way to raise concerns or correct inaccurate information. AI can help employers find talent that traditional processes sometimes overlook. It can make recruiting faster, it can expand access to opportunities, and allow hiring teams to spend more time engaging with people. Those benefits are real, but they also depend on many choices made by employers. And the ethical question is not simply whether AI should be involved in a hiring decision, but it's whether or not the processes remain relevant, fair, understandable, and accountable to the people whose futures are being decided. AI may help an employer evaluate a candidate, but responsibility for the decision remains human. After all, these are decisions which have profound implications for the people involved. That's it for today's Workplace Minute. Thanks for listening. We'll see you next time. And a big thank you to WorkHuman for supporting the Workplace Minute. And be sure to subscribe to the HR Happy Hour Network on YouTube or wherever you get your podcasts. I'm Steve Boese, and this has been the Workplace Minute from H3 HR Advisors.